Hi, I'm Caroline with Free Speech TV. I'm sitting down right now with Andrea Kalin, the writer, producer, and co-director of the film Red Lines, which you just saw. Now we're sitting down right now talking about how it is International Human Rights Day, and Free Speech TV is so thrilled to be premiering this film. Thanks so much for joining with me, Andrea.
Great to be here, Caroline.
Now, we were just speaking about how this is a very complicated film because you, as the co-director and producer, have had to update it so many times as the situation in Syria over the past 4 years has been very dynamic and is constantly shifting. Tell us about any updates that have happened since wrapping the film now that you're sitting in DC.
I think the tragedy is that you want to be able to update a film and say, where are they now, and what has evolved, and what's changed, and generally it's an upward mobility, or there's an advancement. But in this case, the tragedy is that a situation that was really bad has only gotten worse. And so this is our third time updating the statistics at the end of the film, which list the casualties. It's now at 200,000 plus. When we first wrapped the film and premiered it at Hot Docs in the spring, we were at 100,000. You've got 300,000 political prisoners that are now in jail. So the numbers are devastating, and that's part of the pain in making such a film, is that it's ongoing, and that's harrowing.
Hi, my name is Muaz Mustafa. I'm the executive director of the Syrian Emergency Task Force and one of the subjects of the movie Red Lines. And thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to come and speak to you today. Although it's an incredibly depressing film, it's important to understand that we're still here and we're still working, just as hard, if not harder than day one. And the fact is that we get that inspiration and that energy from the people in Syria, who, from their fight for their own freedoms, freedom of speech, their dignity, their self-determination, and through their voice, those children that wrote on the wall at the beginning, expressing how they felt about dictatorship and what they suffered, and sparked a revolution that they inspire us to continue going. So as depressing as the film may seem, and that's the reality of the situation, we're still working harder than ever to help support the real heroes that are inside of Syria.
Now at Free Speech TV, I do get to see a lot of documentaries before they hit the airwaves, and this film is absolutely one of the most powerful films I've ever seen, because it really does bring a human side to this conflict that is very disturbing, and not really a story that we get to hear very often here in the United States. Tell us a little bit more about making the film and your motivations of working with Razan and Muaz and putting a human face on this conflict.
I met Muaz socially through a producer who was working for the BBC. And she said, you've got to talk to this guy. He's a revolutionary. He used to work for the Libyan revolution. Now he's heading up the Syrian Emergency Task Force. He's a powerhouse. He wields so much access both in the halls of power, whether that be at the White House, Congress, internationally. His own past, Muaz's background, is really interesting. He grew up in a Palestinian refugee camp outside Damascus and came to this country at 13 years old and ends up on Capitol Hill. So just that combination of a character with that background and that access, even without meeting him, it's intriguing. And so I did get together with him, and he starts showing me YouTube clips that people were sharing with him, Facebook posts, and mostly these inspiring stories of how people were trying to organize in a way where they were setting up secular police forces and secular courts and training women so that they could get involved in local governance. And at that point, it was very early in the conflict. It was still 2012. I said, I'm not hearing any of this. I mean, why isn't this making its way out? And essentially, not to put all the blame on the media, but it was very hard to understand and to know what was going on in Syria at the time after Marie Colvin's death in February 2012. There were no international journalists left. The few that were covering Syria were going in and out, very similar to like what we did. So the context was missing unless you had your eyes and ears on the ground from the activists on what all these videos meant and what were the day-to-day developments that were happening. And so Moaz was that key. He was the one that was being fed this information from inside, from the front lines, in the trenches, and his job was to try to analyze that and mitigate that, and then try to win support so that their efforts would be backed.
You know, for the Syrian people, I mean, for me, rather, the American dream of the United States isn't just having a nice house in the suburbs. It is for a country to stand up for what is right at a time when the United Nations is impotent because of the Russian veto, and where people just like us, like you all and me, are living under horrendous circumstances because they asked for their universal and unalienable rights.
After following Moaz around for a few months, he said, I really want to introduce you to my partner, Razan. I said, this is great, let's Skype with her so that I can get to know who she is as well. And Razan, very interesting too, had a really high-pitched voice, sounded so delicate. And I asked her, you know, about her background, and it seemed like she came from a very privileged, very prestigious family inside Syria. And she was an English teacher at the time, before that, an English major, loved Shakespeare. And I said, you know, Razan, what are you going to do when this is all over? I mean, do you see yourself going into humanitarian work? And she said, oh, no. And at that point, people actually thought the revolution would be 6 months, 9 months, a year, maximum 2 years. No one ever thought that we'd be going into our 4th year. It was just something that was beyond what people could wrap their heads around. But anyway, and I asked her, what would you like to do when this is all over? And she, with such confidence and a deliberate voice, said, I am going to be the first female president of Syria. So we realized very soon after that these were two characters, really interesting people, definitely fascinating backgrounds. They would have never worked together had the revolution not taken place. They would be in totally separate circles. Their paths would have never crossed. So the combination of both their dynamic personalities, their fortitude, their focus, their passion, and also the story that they were sharing with us of what was really happening inside Syria, both Oliver and I decided to take the plunge, go on this journey of discovery, and we didn't know where it would take us. We really didn't have a story arc. We didn't have a particular agenda. All we knew is that here were two really interesting people that could offer us a prism, kind of a lens into the conflict, and to be able to hear what they're doing on the ground, see what they're doing on the ground, and to construct a story that's different and that was not one that was making the airwaves or even, you know, any press at that time.
And I really have to thank you, Andrea, that Free Speech TV, we really are so proud to be premiering a film like Red Lines. Your film does such an incredible job of unpacking the very complicated issues within Syria, as well as following Razan and Moaz, because they are just such dynamic people. So we just want to thank you on behalf of Free Speech TV that we are honored to be able to premiere this film, especially as it is Human Rights Day.
Well, thank you, Carolyn. And from our perspective, symbolically, to know that we're premiering on a network that calls itself Free Speech TV, because the conflict began, the revolution, the uprising started because people spilled into the streets. seeking that very free speech that too often we take for granted. And so to be able to speak to an audience that values free speech, that understands the importance of a pluralistic democracy, dissent, opposing views, all of that is in a very messy but dynamic and interesting mix. And that's what, Free Speech TV is for us. So we hope that people will check out our website after they see the film, redlinesfilm.com. We really want people to spread the word about this film, to get, as we've said, enraged and to engage. Because why enraged? There's too much getting thrown around without any context. There's too easily people talk about ISIS as being a threat without recognizing, where did ISIS come from? How did an ISIS emerge? It wasn't a last minute or kind of out of osmosis that this radical extremist group came onto the scene. 2 years ago, Razan and Moaz were warning people, we're getting squished, we're getting squeezed between a dictatorship and extremists. And if something or someone does not change this or turn it around for us or give us the support, the moderates, the support we need, then we're going to find we're either back in Assad's clutch or we've been completely taken over by extremists. So this is not a process that a light bulb went off or a light switch went on and all of a sudden there was this group called ISIS. This was a very protracted and incremental process that unfortunately is linked to a lot of missteps that we made governmentally, that we made internationally with our partners. And we hope that Red Lines provides the context, provides an entry point to a very complicated story.
Struggle continues today, although the adversaries are more: Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Iran, Russia, the Assad regime. But the people that are fighting for their rights are the same and are incredibly resilient. And it is our responsibility as human beings to support them, but it's also the responsibility of our government to take a leading role at a time where the world seems to have deserted Syria and where the entire world are looking towards the United States to take a leadership role to end the violence in Syria, because that aligns both with our national strategic interests and our core values and morals. And so thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you guys, and please pray for the people of Syria. Thanks.